So thank you all for coming. I'm Suresh Mehta, and I am at the University of Utah, and I'm here having a year back. I went to school, I went to Atlanta, at Ivy Concourse, so not too far from here, and happy to be back here to tell you about the stuff I'm working on. So I have, I guess, bad news and good news for you. So we'll start with that. So the bad news is you may have thought this is going to be a course just about machine learning in general, and this will not be that. That's the bad news. The good news is that I hope it'll be something even more interesting than that. In other words, it'll be about how people actually use machine learning, about how we're deploying these tools out in the world, and how these tools have massive consequences for people, and how we can, as computer scientists, as people who do data science, can do a good job of making these tools work better for them. Right, so that's the big picture. So the title of the course is, it consists of 3 things, right? So let's see. So you all think there. So I mentioned 3 things here. And of course, you've seen, you saw from the course material I sent out this conference, this workshop that's been having for a couple of years now on this topic. And you've also hopefully had a good review yesterday of some of the basics of machine learning. Now, how many of you have seen anything to do with machine learning before yesterday? It's fine. Okay, how many of you saw anything to do with machine learning for the first time yesterday? Okay, good. So it's a mixed crowd. So what I thought I'd start with is just a quick, not so much a review because you've done that yesterday, but more like a discussion. So one of the things I would like to say, and again, how many of you have seen the course webpage that I think was sent out? Okay, so if you've seen the course webpage, you've seen one thing that's very important there. In the second paragraph, before all this stuff of the course, I said that I would like this to be a discussion. A lot of the things we're going to be discussing here are new ideas. They're ideas that are coming out in the last couple of years. These are not ideas that are set in stone. These are not ideas that are necessarily correct. We think they're correct, but we're not sure. So your ideas, your thoughts, your criticism is important to sort of see how the discussion goes. So don't think of this as me sort of pouring knowledge into your brains. Think of this more like a discussion that we will be having about this whole issue, okay? Including machine learning. So first thing up, what I'd like to do is get a sense from you in terms of the basics of machine learning. This idea of supervised learning, unsupervised learning, classification, binary classification, things like SVM, decision trees. You probably heard all these terms yesterday. Are there any questions so far? Any thoughts you've had? Things you went through with like 6 hours of lectures yesterday, now it's all buzzing around in your brain. And do you have any sort of thoughts or questions or ponderings about what you learned so far, especially for the people who may not have seen this before? Anything so far? So if I ask you, if I call out someone and said, okay, so can you tell me what supervised learning is? Hopefully, will you be able to explain what it is? If you can, that's good. If you can't, that's a sign that maybe when you go through a quick sort of review. So any thoughts, any feelings you find you understand these concepts? And feel free, so it's okay to raise your hand. No? All good so far? More or less good. Okay. So we will, like I said, we will not be spending a lot of time here talking about the details of every single new machine learning technique. In fact, I will try to stay away from them as far as possible, mainly because the things I will be talking about are layers. So if you think of your typical machine learning system, right? In comes some data, and out comes, if you're doing binary classification, some kinds of, yes or no, right? That's pretty much how a simple binary classification system works. Or maybe if you're doing regression, instead of a yes or no answer, you get an answer between 0 and 1, right? Some kind of score function. So these all work in different ways, and you can sort of open them up. You have your decision trees, you have your SVMs, you have your neural networks, deep learning, you have all these different things going inside. What we'll be talking about a lot here is not so much how these systems get built, because there are many ways to do them. And in fact, at this point, you could argue that there are such good standard ways to build these systems. You don't need to think too much about how they're built. What's more interesting is the kind of wrapper you put around them to interpret the results of what these things are telling you, what these systems are telling you. And so what I will be talking about for much of this, the week that we're here, a week or so that we're here, is basically about wrappers around this process to make it fair, accountable, and transparent. And also interpretable, which is a word that doesn't get mentioned enough. And I'll mention why this is mentioned. Okay. So that's what I want to talk about. And so what I'll do first is give you a very quick kind of roadmap of how we're going to talk about this problem. Okay? So this will cover basically a brief roadmap of the entire 10 days or so. And then I'll start getting into details of one of these topics. Okay? And again, feel free to interrupt, ask questions at any time. So to start off with, I think with the why I'm talking about this, or why we care about some of these issues in machine learning, is primarily because of the success of machine learning. The reason you're here today, the reason everyone's interested in machine learning, is because the last 5-10 years it has somehow become an extremely powerful and ubiquitous tool for doing all kinds of data mining in every place you can imagine. Yeah, it would be hard for you to imagine one thing you do in a day, or it would be hard to imagine a day when you do not, in some level, use machine learning or are used by machine learning. If you've gone on Facebook today or Twitter, then you have been used by machine learning, and you might have used it as well. Right? And so, while all those things are important, there are lots of areas where machine learning is being used now, which you may not have been aware of, or if you read some of the things I put out, you are aware of, which are a bit more, I would say, frightening, or a bit more important, and a bit more scary, and where it becomes even more important that we do things sort of carefully. And so I want to talk about some of those domains, not just to introduce the areas to you, but to see how machine learning gets used in those areas, so that we can then understand what are the possible ways in which we might try to implement it correctly. Okay, so this brings me to the topic of what I'll be calling automated decision making. The idea is of a system that makes decisions either in a fully automated way or in a partially automated way. So where the system assists the decision maker who may be you. And if you're busy writing down notes, I do have notes here which I will give you as well. So if you missed them, don't worry. So to think about decision making and think about examples of decision making, it's helpful just to think about a very toy case. And we'll go back to this very simple case of binary classification. Right? So we have some input, it goes into some system, the system either outputs a yes or no, which is a decision, or it outputs some score, which is then used to make a decision. Right? So again, there are, of course, many more complicated ways to think about this, but we're not talking about that. It's going to be enough. And so these decisions are, they can be very complicated and they involve many other parts. But it turns out you can think about this abstraction as a way to think about how these decisions get made and where the issues are. And so I'm going to list 4 separate examples. I think I have 4 separate examples, at least 3 separate examples based on time. And if there's time, I don't know yet if I will, I might talk about education. So that's something that affects us all. I want to talk about 3 separate domains where, right now, as we speak, machine learning tools are being used in a big way to assist in decision making. And you know that it's happening in a big way when there are startups forming around it. In all of these areas, there are multiple startups, all over the world, trying to come up with solutions, trying to make money off solutions to these problems. Okay. And so what I want to do is systematically break down the ways in which these companies and these systems are trying to solve these problems using machine learning. Not because I want to, become an expert in how to build systems to do hiring, although that might be handy, but because it helps us understand how those systems get deployed, what are the important questions, and what are the ways in which we want to think about them. One thing that I was struggling with a lot for a few months before I came here, I was trying to find good examples of where machine learning is being used in a context that makes sense in India. Of course, these are all in general contexts that make sense anywhere, but a lot of the examples I'm aware of are examples from America. And I don't know of too many examples that are here of, for example, if in fact there are companies are trying to build systems to help with hiring. So if you are aware of any such examples, I would be very interested to hear about them. So So if you can share those with me, if you just sort of put your hand up and let me know. I would like to hear, or if you go back and sort of go start looking around on the web and Googling around, if you find something, I would very much like to know if there are good examples of these kinds of situations here happening within India. I mean, I'm sure there are, I just haven't been able to find them yet. Okay. So having said that, a lot of my discussion will be, unfortunately, in that sort of American context, especially here. These are more generic, but this will be in the US context. So again, we will try to sort of be generic as far as possible, but some of the specific issues are linked to how things work in the US and may not work as well or work differently out here. Okay. So let's think about the problems of criminal justice, namely policing. Right? So what are the main issues that come up when you do policing? So how many of you have seen the movie Minority Report? Some of you have. For the rest of you, shame on you. It's good. Okay. So if you haven't, at some point you should try to go look at it. It's a typical action, Hollywood action movie. But it's set in kind of a near future. And this near future, there are these three, what they call precogs, three people with sort of this strange ability to predict when crime is going to happen. Okay? And so the way the thing works is something happens and they get a vision, and then a whole lot of nonsense happens and a ball comes out with a name on it. And the name is the name of the person who's about to commit a crime. And so the police, they go and sort of catch this person before they commit the crime. Then they put them in jail. It's very questionable. Anyway, that's the movie. So the idea sadly, the idea of using algorithms, so using machine learning in criminal justice is basically Minority Report idea. At least one aspect of it. Can you predict crime? Can we use all the data we have from past crimes in different locations by different people to predict when crime will happen next? To predict where it will happen? And also, in some cases, to predict who will commit it. Okay. Now, in different places, these different parts of this have become more important. These two have become a big issue in policing in the US. There are police departments across the country that now use software that will essentially attempt to do this. And one of the companies involved in this is called Predpol, Predictive Policing. Another company involved in this is called HunchLab. Disclaimer, I work with these people, so you can decide to trust or not trust anything I have to say about that. This is not done as much, thankfully. It is partly done, at least we think it's being done by the intelligence services, the NSA and the National Security Agency and other kind of CIA and people like that. We don't know because they won't tell, and we are taken to court, and then sometimes in court they admit, yes, we're actually using some tools to predict whether someone's going to. So they don't just use tools to predict who's going to commit a crime. They have a particular person and say, okay, is this person a risk? Should this person be put on a terrorist watch list, or should they be not allowed to fly? All of this is done preemptively. It's not based on crimes actually committed, but based on some kind of profiling of individuals. So there's some kind of machine learning that goes into deciding whether someone will commit a crime. But we're not going to talk about this here, mainly because it's sort of ethically and legally very problematic, and I don't want to. It's complicated. There are much more examples of how this works. And the other example of how machine learning is used in criminal justice is in what is called risk assessment. And this is a slightly different problem. So the risk assessment problem is different from the problem of crime. In crime prediction, you're trying to say, okay, is there going to be crime here tomorrow? In risk assessment, you've already arrested someone. Okay, so there's always someone who's in jail, and let's say they're asking for bail, or there's a sentencing that has to be done, or they have to be given parole. So there's all about negotiation. Okay? And in each of these cases, the question is, should we give this person bail? In other words, will they run away if we give them bail? Should we sentence them to a long duration for the crime or a short duration? Like how much punishment do they deserve? Should we give them parole? If we give them parole, I'll likely go and commit a crime again. In all these cases, there's some kind of algorithm that people use right now that takes in inputs of what a person and predicts something. and based on some decision that's made. So, I think what would be interesting to do is to walk through some of these examples to imagine, suppose you are a data scientist, you're working at some company, and the local police station comes to you and says, we want to do one of these things. We want to build a system to do this kind of detection. So this is a little test for you. So what would you do? So let's say the goal is to say, predict when and where. Let's make it even simple. Okay? So let's say that I want to predict really, so every morning, the police station commander is going to put on their computer, they're going to run the software. And so they have some district. So they have some district area, and they put the software, and they want the software to tell them, okay, where is crime likely to happen today? So if I have only my 2 police officers, I can go and put them to monitor where I think crime is going to happen. And I won't waste my time with places where crime is not going to happen. What would you do?
I would run the same software to commit crime somewhere else.
You would run the same software to commit crime somewhere else. There you go. But really, if you only want to build software for that, what would you do? What's the first thing you might think about doing? So you're also data scientists to be, right? So this is a problem you've been given now. What do you do?
Yeah, data.
You're not going to answer that way. I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to them.
Looking at the history of crimes.
So can you speed up?
So the time at which the crime has got a peak level, in nights or something like that, and we analyze it.
So you have, so what kind of data are you looking at? Let's write on the data. What's the data here?
Frequency of crime rate.
Sorry, one person, one time. Yes.
Frequency of crime rate, like when and where exactly.
Okay, so I have a data, so let's be very, very low level. I have a data record, right? What are my features?
Time.
Time. Okay, so time is one feature. What else? Place. So how do I input place?
Coordinates.
Coordinates. Good. So that long. Okay?
Type of crime.
Type of crime.
Weapon used.
Sorry?
Weapon used.
Weapon used. Okay, good.
Target type.
Target type. Who said target type? What does that mean?
So, for example, in the global terrorism database, they have the target type. The target is either an educational institution or some hospital, or it is just a road, or what kind of.
So the kind of
is it a military target?
Good.
Civilian target?
Good.
How many people were involved?
How many people involved in the crime or in the
crime?
activities? In the crime. The number of people.
Organization, perpetrator.
But how do you know this?
Someone? He asked a question.
Where is it?
From the history of
Yeah, like what? Police records usually have how many people were
solo
involved.
actor or gang member.
Sorry?
Solo actor or gang member in his history it can come like that.
But that comes in the number of people involved, right?
It could. Why not?
Yeah.
There's no right answer here. We could probably go on for a while. I'm not gonna let you go on for long. This is good. But the question of where does the data come from? So someone said history. So where history? What history?
Past criminal records.
Sorry?
Past criminal records.
What kind of records?
Intelligence records.
Crime committed, crime reported, or what kind of crime? What kind of records are you talking about here?
The crime reported but not successfully.
So like an FIR was filed or not filed? So is the crime when someone gets robbed, or is the crime when the FIR gets filed?
So crime is both. In case, for example, if we talk about improvised explosive devices, then if we detect successfully and it does not explode, then also we have to report everything, these all parameters.
Yeah.
In case it explodes, then we say that the explosion was successful
Yeah.
and we were defeated in foiling it. So
Sure. So you're saying whether the crime happens or not, the possibility of the crime is to be recorded. But there's also the question of where you get the data from, right? So I mean, how do you know? So the IED is a sort of complicated example. Let's think of just regular crime, right? I mean, normal sort of crime that just happens in the city. So there's crime. So there's someone takes my pocket and runs away. That's a crime. Will that be in my database necessarily?
No.
Only if I go and report it. But so there's an issue of so there's crime. So what I want to distinguish is that there was lots of data about that you could get. Some of it will involve actual crime reports reported to the police. Right? Some of it could be, you know, arrests that are made. So the fact that a crime is being reported doesn't mean an arrest is made. Like you may not really catch someone. But let's say you have a separate database of people who have been arrested. So that's another thing that could potentially be used here. Maybe, maybe not. You could also imagine, okay, actual sentences, right? Because, you know, arresting someone doesn't mean they're guilty of a crime, but this could actually be a sentencing. You could also have calls to emergency services if you have them. So in the US, you have 911, you know, you can call 911. That might also tell you. So someone calls 911 and says, oh my God, someone's breaking into my house. But then the police come, there's no one there. Is that a crime or not? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So there are different ways in which you can collect data that might look like this. You might have some features, you might have not some features. There's a whole bunch of data collection you can do. Okay, so fine, so we've collected data. Now what do we do? Now, I've got my data. But my goal is to predict it. What do we do next?
Statistical analysis of data.
How?
Finding a probability.
No.
On the basis of given data, we find the probability of next crime.
Could you use the machine learning tools? Maybe something that we told about yesterday?
Basis. On the basis of
So for example, how would you frame the prediction problem? So the prediction problem would be what? So you have the training data, that's fine. But what is the prediction problem? What is the input, what's the output?
Input will be all these variables and output.
No,
there will be a crime or there
No, that's true. The input will be all of this as training data into building the model. But what is the model supposed to do?
So,
maximize the probability of committing crime given this data.
Given this.
Parameters of this.
Right, but the only parameters I have right now are this.
Yeah.
So in particular, you could think of this way. Let's say I put a grid down. This is a lat long grid, right? What you're really asking is, you know, for this cell, this is what you want. What is the probability that a crime will be committed in this cell at this time? The time could be today. The time could be in the next 5 hours. The time could be the next 1 month. That's up to you. But this is what you want to build. So your predictive model wants to build this thing, right? And in order to build the predictive model, you're going to use all of this training data. Right? So we're going to say, okay, this is an instance of a crime. It happened at this time, in this location, all the features. You will use decision trees, you will use something else, whatever your favorite machine learning model is. But this will be your, these will be your control variable, your indicator variables here, saying okay, time and location. And you use all the other features somewhat to predict what's going on. Right? For this cell. So you might look at all crimes in this cell and build a predictor for this. You might look at all crimes in this cell and build a predictor for this. You might say, well, this is silly. The prediction for this cell and this cell should be more or less the same. So you might do something a bit more clever to say, okay, I can use all of this data to build a predictor for all of these cells. Or you might say, no, in fact, there's a big wall here. So crime here and crime here are very different. And you might use some knowledge there. So you'll build some model. Right? Okay. Okay, good. So we now understand, for this basic problem of predictive policing, somewhat more of the details of how you might go about building a predictive model. Okay? Good. Let's go to the next one. So I'm going to do this example over and over again, not just to sort of get used to the idea of thinking through the details of how you build these models more specifically. So let's look at the next problem, which is risk assessment. In the risk assessment problem now, the goal is very different. You no longer have, okay, predict crime given cell and time. Your question now is predict risk given person. So I give you a person, and you want to determine the risk of some bad outcome happening. And in all these cases, the bad outcomes are different. Right? For the case of bail, the bad outcome would be you give them bail, they run away. They don't come back. In the case of sentencing, what will be a bad outcome? So sentencing is how much sentence to give someone. So this is a bit trickier, right? So what is a bad outcome? A bad outcome intuitively is that you give them, let's say, too lenient a sentence, something like that. Or a bad outcome could be you give them a very harsh sentence so they did not deserve. So often in policing, a bad outcome is only when you view someone bad escaping. It's never viewed as someone who will be put in jail, unfortunately. So that's the weird thing about criminal justice. But okay, so you have some kind of bad outcome and you want to predict it. Again, how would you set up the problem? What is the kind of data you might work with and what do you do? What kind of features might you use in order to build a model for this? What would be a data? Someone who hasn't already spoken. This is good luck. Glad you're having this discussion. Some more people. What kind of data do you use?
Type of crime.
You're not alone. Yes.
Past record of this.
Sorry?
Past record.
Past record, right? So clearly, the past record of the individual should have some role to play in deciding what's going to happen, right? You keep releasing them, they keep committing crime, they keep coming back, say something about them.
Frequency of crime by that person.
Pardon me?
Frequency of crime by that person.
Right, so that would be included in the past record, right? All the crimes are committed in the past. Yeah, that's good. What else? That's it?
Type of crime,
Type of crime.
related with the things.
So I guess that would be included. Okay, so the past record might have things like, the crime type, and when, and so you have all those kinds.
Present crime type.
Mental condition of the mental.
Explain.
Like
Is he suffering from depression or some kind of other?
Just some kind of,
easy.
so emotional state.
It might be also from the religion aspect. Deep into religion.
Sorry?
Is he deep into religion, religious type?
Okay, so it's okay, good. So that's what is in talk. So we'll talk about his emotional state. And other sort of psychological profiling, which sounds like we're talking about. Are they very religious, are they not? Okay, we're in the 21st century. I'm missing a very important
Social network.
There you go. 21st century, social networking, right?
Not on the online social network, but also the real social network. So, like, is she friend with other criminals?
You mean there's something except online social networks?
Yeah, like,
Yes, of course. The real social networks. We'll put real with quotes. Right? Okay. Anything else? Does anyone think any of these things should not be used? Yes.
I think social network should not be used because it goes with, against the basic principle. Like, we want to prosecute people on who they, like, what they do, not on who they are. So,
But suppose here I'm trying to figure out whether someone will commit. So once I release them on parole, it will commit a crime again. It's not about the fun. You are nodding in the back. You got something to say add to this?
Means we need to check their records, like to whom are they associated with, so we can have a nice perception of what they actually are. So we need to check their social networks certainly.
So, you leave this class today or next week, and suddenly we find out I'm this master criminal who's been embezzling funds from everyone, and they know you were in this class with me. I was teaching you something. They don't know what, I was teaching you something. Are you okay with being viewed as a bit more suspicious as a result of that? Because I was in this class, I'm this master embezzler, I taught you something, now you've gone away, and now you went to a bank. Would you consider it reasonable that someone will now say, what are you doing in the bank? Let me ask you an extra question.
I mean, there's always a possibility that I may or may not be associated. So yes, I can be questioned about it.
You're okay with that?
At sometimes.
Okay.
it's like,
I'm actually not a master embezzler as far as I know. Okay, so any other features?
some people think genetics should also be used, but not personally. I don't personally endorse it, but yeah.
Genetics. What do you mean?
Where what are the family records and by genetics.
Are you from a family of criminals?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Our genetics can also have cues about psychological or physiological conditions that person might have had.
you think they should or should not be used?
No, I think it should not be used.
But you said it could be used. Right?
No, like, because
it's
people
possible.
argue that it should be used.
Anyone, what do people think about this? This is an interesting topic here. Very related data, yes.
I guess as a psychological profile, genetics should not be used because that will make people from bad background or psychological disorder more prone to be targeted as criminals.
But suppose they are.
And if they are not,
Okay, so this is interesting. You all thought you came into a machine learning class today morning and suddenly we're discussing ethics. Okay, so let's just get back to data for a second. The question here, the question we start off with is, okay, what data could potentially be useful or relevant, not relevant, it's more in the sphere of relevance, I guess, as to predicting risk. Now we insert a bunch of features and now somebody's saying, well, I don't know about this, I don't know about that one. So my answer to you could be, well, let's not judge, let's just test the data. Let's just build a model and see what happens. What would you say about that? So would you say a priori we should not use this, or you should think, well, let's use it and hope it doesn't have any effect?
so I guess you should use it and it does not have any effect.
Pardon me?
So it should not have any effect.
You believe that it should not have any effect, but suppose the model uses it.
So it's like targeting people of certain nationality that they would be a criminal. Like it's a big topic. Like we cannot target people on the basis of their nationality, psychological and family background.
Suppose the data says that it makes sense to do it. Then what do you do? So you say we should not do it. The data seems to be suggesting, hey, this model is very useful. It's very useful to use this information because the model is very predictive. What do you do?
Like nobody is targeting, it is just about surveillance. Nobody is going to know what is going to happen.
Pardon me?
Like, it is not about targeting. You are just carrying out the surveillance on the basis of risk. So nobody is going to know whether you are a suspect or not, except the agency who is going to profile you.
So you're saying if you do surveillance, but the surveillance, we're not talking about surveillance. We're talking about whether you're released on parole or not.
Okay.
Then you will know. What about that case?
So we weigh that factor down.
Then he will be under specific surveillance.
Sorry, I didn't answer the question.
We'll weigh that factor down by some points. Like,
How will you weigh? Who decides whether you weigh it? You? Are you the expert?
you know,
Then who does it?
so the machine
So the machine does it. So you're saying just build the model and see what happens. Okay, good. We'll come back to all these discussions later. But I deliberately want to bring this up now to give you a taste of what's going to come. But at any rate, you can imagine using any number of these features to build a predictive model. There is a risk assessment model that is currently in use in the US. It's called COMPAS. I don't know what it stands for. And it uses all of these things. All the things you just mentioned that you could use, it actually uses them all. What happens is if you're in jail and you're applying for parole, and you're in one of these jurisdictions where they actually use the system, some police officer comes to you and has this questionnaire, and they ask you a bunch of multiple choice questions. There are 135 questions on this questionnaire. Right, so each question, things like, where do you live? Right, where do you live before you were in jail? Right? Questions like, is there any history of crime in your family? They ask you questions like that. Who have you been meeting over the past, who has come to visit you in jail? And you look at them and see, and then have they committed any crimes? They ask questions like, do you feel angry? Do you feel depressed? Do you feel like you've been punished unfairly? They ask you all these questions, trying to figure out these things. They take the answer to these 135 questions and they put them into a machine learning system that someone might build from here. And the output is a number between 1 and 10. So all of this goes into a system. And the output is from 1 to 10. This is considered low risk, medium, and high. So this is 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 10. This number is given to a judge. So the judge says, okay, we're thinking a number. And based on that, they decide whether you get parole, what's the sentence you get, and what kind of bail.
So why do we have a judge?
Huh?
Why do we have a judge?
Someone has to be made accountable for it.
Sorry?
Some person has to be made accountable for it.
I'm going to buy your coffee. Yes. But we'll get to that point. That's another issue that comes up here. Thank you. So,
Why do you need a judge? The police officer himself can be responsible. He does need a person to be responsible. And he will not be responsible for the risk assessment. He will be responsible for telling that person whether you are low risk, high risk, or medium.
So a couple of interesting things happen here. First of all, and this is a study that came out a week ago. The judges tend to ignore these things. So the number is given to the judge. The judge is not told you have to use this number. They said, okay, this is extra information that might be helpful because machine learning is awesome. Basically, what I'm saying. That's basically trust in machine learning. And it turns out that judges will ignore these numbers in a racially biased way. So if they see, in the US at least, if they see a white applicant with a high number, they'll say, oh, that's just machine learning. It's not good. If they see a black applicant with a low number, see, that's a problem. You can send them. And there's been a study that was done, it came out last week by a newspaper in Florida, where they looked at the inconsistencies among them. So you could say, get rid of the judges. That the judges are the problem, you're not the system. Right? The problem is another study that was done on this system itself. So this system is, by the way, built by a private company. When people ask them, how do you build a system, they're like, we can't tell you, it's proprietary. So we don't actually know how the system is built. We have some information about it. Okay? And apply for a loan, right? You want to get a loan, buy a car, buy a house, whatever. And so actually, I've never had to apply for a loan in India. So when you apply for a loan, so in the US there's this thing called a score, credit score. It's this number between 0 and 850. It's called the FICO score. It has an interesting history. And more is better. And the higher the number, the more the chance of you getting a loan and getting good rate and stuff like that. Is there something? So how does it work? Can you tell me how it works out here if you apply for a loan?
So basically, they see whether you are a government servant or you are a private company.
Okay.
So
public
what's
or
your
private?
annual remuneration,
Yeah.
and whether you have a guarantor or not.
Right. Like collateral.
How's the what is the social status or?
But do they produce any kind of score?
Yes.
No. Okay.
If they score, produce a score, I know not aware.
Okay. So it's not a score that you're publicly with.
They are having
Then audit is-
They are. But it's not told.
from 0 to 900.
There is a rate, stable.
From 0 to 300 to 900 actually.
300, 900. Okay. So 300, 900. With bigger being better. Larger being better. Okay. And is this number told to the person applying the loan?
No.
No. Okay. But it's just some internal kind of calculation.
Now people are using it. They are advertising that you should have your CIBIL score.
So what's it called?
CIBIL score, CIBIL.
Great.
Okay. So they're advertising that you should have it. So how are they? So you can apply. You can go somewhere to get your score.
Online we can submit it. They are charging some fees and they will give you some score.
So this is a private company that does this.
HDFC Bank they are doing.
So HDFC does it. Is there any other bank? So but other banks?
There are
use-
many banks they are doing it.
So they use the standard.
American Express is there. So.
Okay.
But the signal is common.
Yeah. Okay. So good. So this is the exact equivalent of that. So there's some kind of score, and does anyone know how the score is computed? What the formula is?
Formula is not known.
No.
But normally they see the bank history, your credit transactions per month, per year.
Right.
So
But the exact formula of how this is done is unknown.
no, it is unknown.
So this is presumably itself some kind of machine learning formula. Maybe. We don't know. It could be something.
And
Okay.
maybe most of the banks are doing it in a wrong way. So
Why?
because we have seen like somebody is applying for a credit card,
Yeah.
they do these ratings.
Yeah.
So suppose somebody is he should have been given more credit,
Yeah.
but he is not getting, and the other person is getting more. So
Yeah.
it can be easily compared.
Okay.
That there is some problem in it.
There are some problems. Have people that study on this? Or?
And all what he's saying is that it's counterintuitive.
It's counterintuitive. But has any sort of systematic study been done on this score?
Maybe people doing
Like someone gets some money and just send off a bunch of fake applications and look at the scores and see what you get.
There are people studying them. There's an institute called IFMR in Chennai.
Okay.
And I met a lady who is studying the credit scores in like rural Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
So she was telling me that caste is the caste correlates most with the score rather than any other thing.
Okay. Cash.
Caste.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's scary. Okay, I see. Okay, that's not good. So, okay. All right. So even in the US, John, again, till about 10 years ago, I only discovered this a few months ago myself. That I thought that this was a score that was used and I was fine and that was all there was to it. But apparently this score is not as useful as it used to be. Because after the tech market crash and then the housing crisis, people's scores kind of dropped. Everyone's score kind of dropped. So the scores are no longer being a good indicator of whether someone is a good credit risk or not, because everyone's score is getting hammered by the housing crisis. And so there's a whole new industry that has grown up, again with lots and lots of startups in it, trying to build better predictive models for whether someone will get good credit risk. And again, what is the task here? The task here is, probability of default given a person. Right? Like give you a person, what is the probability they're going to default? And that's really all the bank wants to know. Right? Are they going to default, and do they pay back in timely fashion and all that usual stuff. Right, so default is an extreme case, you just don't pay it back. But there's also, you can also imagine timely repayment. I mean, they might pay it back, but it's a hassle, you're going to keep going and chasing them for the money. You don't want that. So again, here's the task. This has always been the task, right? From day one for the money lending is one of the oldest professions in the world. So thousands of years, this has been the question. How do you do this? Right? The only difference now is that you have all this data that you want to use to predict it. Right? And again, we can start imagining all the kinds of features that might go into this. And again, you can play the same game we've been playing now for the last 1 hour, and I'm sure you'll come up with a whole bunch of features. So we just quickly came up with. So we talked about transactions, credit history. What else? Salary you mentioned. You also mentioned cost, which I get a very worried about, but I'll put that anyways, because apparently they use it. What else? We have mentioned government sector employee or private sector employee. I guess is that because of stability? Because a government job is a more stable job, and therefore, is that the factor as well?
Oh, it's stable, and hence the job will not go, and hence you'll be able to pay.
Right. So, okay, what else?
Past loan and EMI payment history. If it's
Right. Collateral, the person.
Yeah.
Number of dependents.
other loans are already.
Right.
Other loans are already being taken.
Other.
Some other loans are already.
Oh, so would that be what they call it the EMI history? Yeah.
Obviously, the social network also. Because like if I have like rich friends, I can pay back.
So if I pay back my loans and you want, then I will charge you to make you my friend on Facebook so that you will look better.
You can. Like rather personal, more connected friends like family and like closer friends who can like actually bail you out when you go back.
Number of houses.
Yeah.
Friends don't let friends default on their loans.
Houses, cars.
Sorry?
Property, house, cars.
So would that count as this? Or is that different? Okay. Any else? Okay, so you could imagine collecting all this data. To build a model, again, a predictive model to predict these numbers. And again, you could think of it as a regression task where you predict the probability of default or a yes or no for a loan. You could even say, okay, well, you're a bad risk, I'll give you a loan but at a high rate. So even if you don't pay back, I'll make more money off you. So there are different things you could do with this task to do that. So it turns out that all of this information, including this, is now being used by companies that sell sort of loan profiling services to banks. So if you're a bank, you want to give out small loans, let's say a small business loan, and you want to reduce the cost of processing the paperwork for this loan. In other words, you want to reduce the cost of investigating someone who's applying for this loan for you. And so you go to this third-party company, and they say, okay, tell me what you know about the small business. And they'll go and look up online, they'll look at your Facebook business page, they'll look at your Yelp reviews, other reviews you have, they'll build a profile of you, some kind of predictive profile of you based on all this information. And they will give it to the bank. And the bank will then decide, okay, based on this risk level, do we want to give this person a loan? There was a proposal last year, a year or two ago, doing essentially what I was joking about, that banks in the US will look at your Facebook feed to see how many of your friends have good credit scores. And based on that, we'll come up with some model for whether you should be given a loan or not. And at that point, I remember we were joking saying, my credit score is so I'm happy to, with the right amount of compensation, I'm happy to make you my friend. So you can get a good loan as well. We laugh about this, but and this, again, there was an article on this last week itself, but this has been brewing now for a year or so. So the Chinese government wants to give every citizen a score. They want to have a sort of good citizenship score for every person. And that score, among other things, will be used to give out loans, to be used in hiring, for jobs, for everything. And that will involve all of this, because again, the Chinese government has control over most of the major social networks and other entities there in China. It will also things like, if you are friends with people who speak out against the government, then your score will go down. So again, none of the details are obvious yet. We don't know what's going to happen, but at least the stated intentions of the government and what they've said so far in public, which has been very little, implies that all of these things are going to be used to build some kind of universal score that will be used not just for loans but for all kinds of things. So there's a lot of interest in expanding the scope of what kind of data you can collect about a person. And again, this works because in China you can coordinate, right? In the US, well, at least till November 9th, if you want to ask Facebook and Twitter and everyone else to do, they'll say no. Now I'm not so sure, but you never know. Okay, so and again, where does the training data for this come from? It's another thing to think about, right? So if you're a bank and you want to collect, or if you're a third-party company and you're trying to build a predictive model, where is your training data coming from? you have the train data. You can't build this model. You need some train
You can
data.
buy the transaction history from the bank.
Sorry?
You can buy the data of transaction history from a bank.
Okay. So you basically, so in other words, if you're a bank, right, you have your own sort of history of transactions.
Yeah.
And this can be put in a model to predict what would be good loans for you. Now, this may not be good for predicting loans for different banks.
Yeah.
It may be that your bank specializes in certain kinds of loans. Maybe your bank specializes in car loans, or specializes in certain kinds of mortgage loans, or whatever. But this is how it's used. What I didn't mention though, also in the hiring case, we talked about training data, right, from the past history of the company. At least the company I spoke with, they only use training data from one company to build a model for that company. Every time a new company comes, they build a new training model, a new model for them based on their own training. So same with the banks. Each bank has its own data, and you build a different model for that. It's
Why
not,
do we do this?
huh?
Why do we do this?
Why do what?
Why do we, the banks have their own training model? Because the customers are similar across different banks.
It's not that the banks have their own model, it's that the bank outsources this task of doing prediction to a third party, and where else do they get data from? I mean, where will the third party get the data from? So suppose you two are competing banks. You give me your data, you give me your data. Now I put them together into the model. This could become problematic now, because am I using information from them to help you? No bank wants to know that their information is going to be used for someone else.
It's just the business considerations, or it's something to do with machine learning?
I don't think there's any technical reason not to merge data. I think it's really business considerations. Because if I tell you I will take your data and I'm going to use it for someone else, I'm like, I'm not going to use my data. That's the problem. So yeah, I think technically from a machine learning point of view, it makes perfect sense to take as much data as you can and put it all together and do something with it. But that's just the politics of this world. But it's also important because it means that if you're limited to train data from one particular entity, then your predictions are necessarily skewed in some way. You have to keep that in mind. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left before our break.
No, the tea has come, so if you can
Can we stop now?
break now.
Okay. Alright, so maybe so before we go for tea, far be it from you to stop from your tea. Any questions? I mean, you had a lot of good questions already. That's good. But any other questions? But I'm gonna move away from this topic very quickly. But before we move on, do you have any last minute thoughts about this so far? Again, remember the whole exercise here is not to learn about how to do hiring, but to learn about, think about the process of how you build a model for your clients. Okay, alright, let's go.
15 to 20 minutes?
Yeah.